met this guy that I just thought kind of swept me off my feet. We were very seriously dating within just a couple of months. He met my family. A couple months later, I was in Europe going there to study abroad. He met me over there and it was like, fireworks and love and romance. And, he ended up proposing to me in Venice. The first boundary I put up with him, which was to say, let's wait, like this is really going quick. He started pulling away. He started giving me the silent treatment. There were gaslighting was happening to me. A light bulb went off in my head and I was like, oh my God. I was like, I didn't just have a bad boyfriend. I had dated a narcissist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to a very special edition of the I Just Want This Done Divorce podcast, episode 61 for those of you keeping track at the home game. Today, we have a very special guest, Ann Marie Allison, co-writer, director, producer of the film You're Dating a Narcissist, and now also book, I understand, by the same title, right? There it is. So it's not just a prop in the movie. It's actually real. You wrote and produced and directed this film. Obviously, it's a topic of interest to our listeners and viewers because we talk about these issues on our show, dating and relationships. It's not just about divorce cases or boring law stuff. So first, if you could introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about your background, I think that'd be great.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. I have been doing film and writing film for about 17 years, but before that, I was actually in the psychology field. I got my undergrad in psychology, and then I got my master's in counseling and psychology. My story is that over time, I was working in corporate America, but felt a little bit like a square peg in a round hole and was always trying to be creative and write short stories or get up on stage or improv and stuff like that. And so I discovered screenwriting in my early 30s and kind of fell in love with it. Have been trying to kind of do the thing ever since. And it is very difficult to kind of get your writing, in front of the right people and make films. But I've been privileged enough to have 3 different films made. The first one is called Golden Arm. It's a female buddy comedy and set in the world of ladies arm wrestling. And it's a really fun comedy. And then my second film, The Fabulous Four, came out about a year and a half ago in theaters. It stars Susan Sarandon and Bette Midler. And then we have You're Dating a Narcissist, which was my feature debut as a director, starring Marisa Tomei, Sherry Cola, Sierra Bravo. So that's kind of how I got into the film side of things. But it's been a really interesting journey of getting this particular movie made. And it does come from a very personal experience myself, which is that I dated a narcissist in my 20s and had no idea that this person, had this personality disorder.
When you were dating this person and you were getting these things were happening or bad things were happening, you didn't know this was a narcissistic person.
No. Mm-mm.
Only kind of figured it out later?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was actually in my graduate program, where we study psychologists and their theories and the DSM that talks about the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for psychology. Nobody in psychology out there, but it talks about personality disorders and narcissism. And I had no idea that this is kind of like what I got hit by. I call it that I got hit by the narc train, where I, was just kind of doing my thing, going to school, meeting new people in this new area that I was in. And met this guy that I just thought kind of swept me off my feet. We were very seriously dating within just a couple of months. He met my family. They all thought he was charming and lovely. And it was about, a couple months later, I was in Europe. I was going there to study abroad. He met me over there and it was like, fireworks and love and romance. And, he ended up proposing to me in Venice, and I'm 24 years old and I'm just thinking the world is my oyster here. Here's my guy. Here's, my forever person. And it was the first boundary I put up with him, which was to say, let's wait. This is really going quick. And my dad, by the way, I'm the only girl of 3 brothers. So my father was like, I knew he would flip out if I got engaged to somebody that was, just a couple months into meeting him. And so I said, let's wait. And it was like this, I could just see this little click that happened. I remember being like, that was weird. And then there were he started pulling away. He started giving me the silent treatment. There were all these things that started happening. And it was just a few months later that I ended up stumbling upon some uncovering some lies that he had told, big lies, but also, little lies, like, why would you even lie about this kind of thing? And then I was told that, that wasn't the case and that wasn't true. And it was, gaslighting was happening to me. But, at the time I didn't even know what gaslighting was. I had no idea. So anyway, this is all to say that it wasn't until years later when another friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, went through a divorce, and her therapist called her ex a narcissist. As a matter of fact, she chased her out of their therapy session and said, I know this is probably unethical, but your husband's a raging narcissist. You need to run. And she came home and told me this. And I was like, what are you talking about? Aren't narcissists people that like look in the mirror a lot? Isn't that like, I had no idea. I was just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But the more she sort of laid out the pattern of behavior and treatment, a light bulb went off in my head. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I didn't just have a bad boyfriend. I had dated a narcissist. And so I was called at the time. I was already writing film. And I was just called to write something about this. I had no idea what it was going to be. I just knew I had to write something. And I went to my writing partner at the time and I was like, would you please help me with this? And she was just as confused as me because she's like, what is this? I have no idea what you're talking about. But the more I started like researching and talking to other people and talking to my own therapist and kind of uncovering everything, I was like, no, this story needs to be told because I felt really called to put something out in the world that I wish I had had when I was going through my own relationship with a narcissist. So that's what brings us here today.
Yeah, and I don't know that there are any other films, or I've never really heard of a depiction of these issues in a movie before.
Well, I will tell you this. If you want to see anything that really is about a narcissistic personality disorder, watch a horror film. Because those films, like, for example, one of the greatest ones I saw where I was like, this is really what it feels like if you're with a malignant narcissist, is The Invisible Man starring Elizabeth Moss.
Interesting. Okay.
Like, I'm a comedy writer. I feel like I take my power back when I'm able to laugh at something or, just not make it bigger than me anymore. And so I felt like I would take the genre of romantic comedies, which sometimes don't teach us the best, lessons about love, and try to attack this, this issue. Because I grew up on rom-coms that said, like, if somebody has a problem or they have, an issue, that you can kind of love it out of them and change them with your love, which is a beautiful thing. And I don't want to take that away from people. But when you're dealing with a narcissist, you're never going to change them.
Yeah, that's one thing a counselor friend of mine says is you can't treat true narcissism. They can teach them behaviors, like do behavior modification, but you can't cure it. It's just the way the person is. So they actually teach them to recognize the behaviors when they happen and do a more constructive behavior, but you can't fix the traits.
Yeah, you can't. You really can't. It's a wiring issue that happens when you're really young. And it's just the way that they learn how to keep themselves safe as a child, whether that is from somebody that inconsistent parenting or over coddling or criticism or abuse, so it's not, it is a sad thing that happens to them. But as Judy says in the book, but also in the movie, it's like, she does not want you to feel sorrier for the narcissist than you do for your own self. So she wants you out of there.
No, it makes sense. So, what was that road like? Like, how long did it take to get the screenplay? And then tell us a little bit about shopping that around in that process, because we don't know how that works.
Or just the general movie making process in general, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to kind of walk you through that. And keep in mind, like, this was also kind of new to me as I learned these different avenues and pathways to getting films produced. But originally it was, you have to start off with a good script. Like, if your script isn't good, you're not going anywhere, So the first couple drafts of the film were more of an ensemble, and it wasn't coming together. Like, when I had it read, people were like, I don't know, like, I don't even know what you're talking about, this narcissism thing. And the more I kind of worked on it, the more it became apparent that this was Judy Kaplan's story. Judy Kaplan is our main character, played by Marisa Tomei. She's a PhD. She's written a self-help book that's a bestseller on narcissism. And she's kind of made it her mission to kind of warn people off of these kinds of personality types. So once I kind of like locked into that, it really kind of came together pretty quickly. But that was like a 4 or 5 year process of just writing and rewriting and trying to understand what it is that you are writing. And I know this from years and years of writing, like it is a process. You have to kind of go through several drafts. You might not know exactly what your theme is until you're, 3 or 4 drafts in. For me, I always say it's like 7 drafts before I really know what I'm working on.
It seems like it's like sculpting, right? Like you're chipping away stone from a block and then it becomes visible as you chip away and you keep chipping and chipping. And then finally you say, oh, it's this beautiful, work of art once you finish. But it takes so much of that work. And that's the unsexy stuff nobody sees.
It really is. And it's a lot of hard work. And especially with the medium of film, because you only have a certain number of pages to communicate. And you're not, unless you're doing voiceover, you're not necessarily in your character's head the way you can utilize pages, in a novel or things like that. Although novel writing, is just as difficult. But so it took some time. And then I got to a place too that I had made Golden Arm and Fabulous 4. And I was like, I had worked with other studios. I had been writing like another thing for Netflix and Sony and did some stuff. And I just started seeing sort of like, okay, here's a pathway, which is like, take it to a big producer. And at one point I had a big producer on it who was like taking it to Netflix and taking it here and taking it there. But I was like on anxious, like pins and needles, because I just had this feeling like, I really want to direct this too. And I don't think I'll trust anyone else to direct. And I realized that I've never directed a feature before, which is another sort of ding on you, right? So I eventually took a polished draft where I was like, I know that this is a good draft of a script. I felt very good about it. I'm very highly critical of my own work, but I was like, this one feels really good and it feels like it's communicating what I wanted to do. And I took it out to my agent and he was like, this isn't commercial. I don't know what you're really talking about here. And this was about, I want to say 2018, maybe. The term narcissism wasn't as big as it is now, right?
Yeah, it blew up on social like a few years ago, something like that.
So I was kind of crushed because I was like, oh, I thought I had this like amazing passion project that was, really a great example of like what I want to do in the world and things like that. And this is all to say that it was COVID and me sitting down and starting to watch like YouTube videos where I started seeing that people were talking about narcissism and narcissistic relationships. And I was like, oh, wow. And I came across Dr. Ramani. You guys might know who she is. And I was just on her podcast a couple of weeks ago. She was like, kind of talking and doing her thing. And she said this thing. She said that narcissism is the public health crisis of our generation. And she's like, it's like secondhand smoking. If you get near it, you're going to be sick. And when she said that, and I'm paraphrasing, it's not exactly a direct quote, but I was like, oh my God, this is important. Like whatever all these other people are saying in Hollywood that it's not important or it's confusing or it's alienating. I was like, there is a niche of people like myself who would appreciate this film. And so I just made it my personal mission. This was 2021. And I said, I'm going to make this movie. I'm going to produce it. I'm going to direct it. And I don't care what comes in my way. I'm going to get this done. And by like later that year, I had formed the company, which is called Cool Girl Productions, which is the company that produced the film. My producing partner, Jorge Garcia Castro, who's an amazing executive in Hollywood and also like had dated a narcissist. He's like, actually, my mother said in Spanish to me, you're dating a narcissist, Jorge, at one point. So he was like, we kind of joined forces and he was able to sort of help me navigate the producing side since he had done this before.
Like lining up financing, right? I mean, you got to get people to back the picture. It takes money.
Yes, it does. And that was like the first thing I started doing which was putting together a business plan and showing like how maybe this could be monetized or commercialized and like going to investors or, as I like to say politely, people in the position to support the arts, like, are you interested in supporting the arts? And I must have, had almost like a full-time job for a year, which was just raising the financing. Jorge and I doing that together. And so, we were lucky enough to get, some financing in. And I will tell you this, which is really interesting. And I think you guys will really be interested in this. Several of our biggest investors were people who had divorced narcissistic people. They had been through such hell that they were like, after all of this, and whether that was a man divorcing a woman or a woman divorcing a man, they were like, I want to help you bring this story into the world, because everybody was telling me I was crazy and that none of this stuff was really happening, or this person was really nice when they were actually horrible to me behind closed doors. And so that was, a couple of linchpin people that came in and got us to a place where part of the process of, making a movie, you need cast, right? And one of the biggest pieces of getting a movie made is the cast that you bring, because the cast really at the end of the day is what people come to see a movie for, unless it is your Marvel movie or a superhero that you just love, or it's a book that you loved, has IP. The cast is what, people love certain actors, and they'll get up out of their seats and go to the theater to see them. And so we had enough money at one point to start making realistic offers.
Well, the thing that's cool is you didn't just get some indie unknown people to do this film. And you would kind of, if you think this type of topic is niche and you're going to get some indie college kids or something, and or some people from the neighborhood theater production, but you got huge stars to be in this with lots of experience. So how did you get those folks? They must obviously believe in the project, but what was the breakthrough for that?
So the breakthrough was, and I will say, like, Marisa was always at the top of the list. Of course, that was a dream. That was like a dream, but I was just looking for someone that could play the comedy.
She's a perfect Judy, by the way. She killed it.
She's so good.
I read this quote somewhere. It said, by the way, she's like, watch the movie if you want the ultimate like counselor Pinterest board, was the quote I read, like, because her outfits were like on point and the whole deal. Yeah.
Oh my God. She's amazing. Our costume designer was amazing.
Yeah.
Talk about Marisa reading the script. Like, just getting it to Marisa was like a combination of like just a little chess game where like Jorge knew somebody and somebody knew Jorge, all these things. And we got it to her and she read it in like a weekend. And I, again, like, we had just gotten to the place of like actually having money to say, like, if we were going to cast someone, we could actually pay you, some, things like that, because that's another piece of it. Like, sometimes you can just get an attachment on no, like vapor. If you're like a big director or you're a producer who's had many things made, sometimes you can get somebody to attach and say, I'll play this part as soon as you get the financing. But in my case, because I was, green and I was directing and no one, I have some short films, but no one knew like what that was going to look like. The only thing I can say is that I had a really, really clear vision after spending so much time in this world and writing this script and knowing my own story. I was like, I had a very clear vision about how I wanted to do the film. And so I was able to impart that to Marisa very quickly. And she was like, look, I love the writing. I love the script. I love this idea. I think it's important to get this message out in the world. So we joined forces, and it was as soon as she came on board. And I will tell you, like, the day that I talked to her, just in terms of a dream come true, I was at dinner. We had just found out that it went to her, and it was like a day later, and her agent texted me. It's like, here's Marisa's number. Give her a call.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I'm like, at dinner, I'm like, should I call Marisa Tomei? I felt like a George Costanza moment,
Yeah, well, the thing I remember is Wayne's World, where they come in backstage and they're like, "Is this cool? Is this cool to see Alice Cooper?"
Yeah, and I had to zen myself out, and I was like, "Is this really going to work?" But no, she jumped in with both feet and gave me some excellent notes on the script that only enhanced the comedy. That's one of the things about
that's cool.
Marisa Tomei that was just a mind blow, on top of the fact that she's just, an amazing powerhouse. But like, she had these very strategic and surgical comedy notes because she is so physically comedic with her body, with her looks, with everything. And I was like, absolutely. And the first thing I did, like the first day we were filming, I was like, I need a second camera. I need a second camera on
to
her.
get the dynamic.
That just so if I'm in our close up and she's doing something very anxiety with her hands, or like,
right,
doing tapping, or all the things that she does in the film. It was kind of like a whirlwind. Once Marisa came on board, it was like off to the races. Sherry Cola was at the top of my list for Diane. I love her. She's an amazing person, amazing actor. And we were so lucky to get her. And Marisa also really loved her. And Sierra Bravo, I went right to Sierra because I had seen Sierra in a movie just recently called Cherry. And she was with Tom Holland, who's like the loveliest guy in the world. but he was playing sort of a psychopathic, narcissistic guy. And I just loved her like quiet power in that film. And I just think she's like our next Audrey Hepburn. I just love her. And and I think she came and she brought this like Eva to life in a way where you feel like her strength, you feel that she's on point, but like you also kind of see the vulnerability and like why she is the way she is. Anyway, so I was so blessed. And then our guys, Marco and Jose, who are amazing gentlemen and the best guys in the world. And, Marco came on board to play Theo. And it's not a spoiler to say that is the person that Marisa thinks is a narcissist. And he was just so emotionally invested on portraying Theo as grounded as he could be, with as much empathy for Theo as he could muster. And I feel like he did such a great job because, a lot of times I get people saying, I didn't know, it was going back and forth. And I was like, is he not? Is he?
Of course, that's the whole idea.
Because it's also what you feel like when you're dating a narcissist. You're like, wait, that was cool. That was nice. That was lovely. That was amazing. Ooh, that didn't feel so good. Like, what happened there? And then you try to talk about it and then you're like told that never happened, or I don't remember, or this is, you're too sensitive, or any of the things that you think you're going to get like some validation. So anyway, I was really, really blessed with our cast, and not only the main cast, but the supporting. And it was just an absolute joy to be able to direct that cast.
So it's funny you mentioned the George Costanza Seinfeld reference, because I was waiting as I was watching the movie. I'm like, will there be a scene where, we get a sort of a callback to like George Costanza, potentially coming in, from that one episode where he tries his best to have a call with Marisa Tomei and then ends up meeting her. So only to find out that, he might have been a narcissist because he was engaged at the time and was meeting her and lied to her. So
yeah, we could talk about the cast of Seinfeld quite a bit.
Right. So as a comedy writer, for you, was it tough to make a film about narcissism, but make it comedy, even with the talents of Marisa Tomei and all these other actors?
Yeah, that's a great question. And absolutely, it was really tough to manage the tone. Throughout the process of trying to get it filmed and trying to get it made and everything, I did have some blowback on that. Like, why are you making a comedy about something that's so serious?
Right. That's kind of what I was thinking too. And so, so elaborate, please.
Well, at the end of the day, I was like I said, if you want to see a movie, a scary, disgusting, really, dark movie about narcissism, watch any horror film, or by the way, Disney films with their villains, the Disney villain. Jafar is the biggest narcissist I've ever seen on screen, so there's a lot of films out there that are dark, right? But I'm not a horror film person. If I was dating a narcissist, I would be like, that only happens to stupid women that go down in basements alone, or whatever. But this happened to me. And I was a bright, I come from a family my parents are married 60 years. My brothers are great men. They have beautiful families and wives. I still got sucked into this, and I stayed for many months longer than I should have. And I was being treated in a way that was very damaging, and it stayed with me for years. So I wanted to do something where I was like, what would I have watched? Something that might have addressed this, or just even said the word that this person, the way that they're acting is narcissistic. Because there was nothing like that then. Now I feel like we have gotten to a place where there's so many more outlets and so much more information on the internet, social media, so many podcasters that talk about this. It's really, sad how many people are connecting on that level of it. But for me, it was always going to have both comedy and, I would say, grounded drama, because those are my favorite kinds of movies. I mean, like Steel Magnolias, when Sally Field's character goes from sobbing to take a whack at Weezer, and then she's laughing. And there's so much comedy throughout that, but then there's a lot of sadness and drama. And that's life too, But I also wanted to just say, like, the comedy side of things, I feel most like myself when I'm able to maybe take a step back and laugh at something, so it doesn't feel like it's bigger than me anymore, and that I can, I can make it a little smaller in my life and just kind of laugh at it. But, what do they say? Like tragedy or, humor is tragedy plus time.
Oh, I've never heard that. That's right when you think about it.
Yeah. So I've been out of mine, and I didn't, I was lucky that I did not marry him. And I've talked about how my girlfriends, came and kind of saved me out of that relationship. I've had friends that have married and been in those kinds of relationships. And once they're past it, you do kind of look back, and one of the things that we do best is just sort of like laugh at the absurdity of what was going on. So that's kind of why I went down that road.
During the movie, you pepper in terms like love bombing, mirroring, hoovering, for example, etc. So can people do some or one or a few of these things without actually being a narcissist? Or is that, I mean, you could just be kind of really cheesy by love bombing someone, or are you a narcissist by doing all this? Yeah.
Narcissism as a stage of development, we all go through it. It is the toddler, the 2 to 4 years, the toddler, like you were talking earlier, Raif, about like holding on to a toy, that is that stage, and that is totally normal. And it's the parents' job to sort of like, guide their child through that. And then also when you're a teenager and a young adult, there's a period of narcissism where you're like so focused on what other people think and your peers versus like who you are, even if it's your parents too, like you're really, enmeshed with your parents. So we can all do these things. We can all make mistakes. We can all be manipulative. We can all lie. We can all, cheat. We can all do these things and still not be a narcissist. And I will say this too, like narcissistic personality disorder, that is a diagnosis that only a psychiatrist or a psychologist, a PhD, could make on someone. I am not trying to diagnose anybody, but I will say that even if someone you are in an intimate relationship with has moderate narcissistic traits, just personality traits, which is where they do gaslight, where they can't take accountability, where they can't, truly apologize for anything and change. They just have these ways of attachment, like your anxious avoidant attachment, insecure attachment, all these things that people are talking about. It can be very damaging to you, especially if you're a helper and, empathetic and you want to connect. It can be very damaging.
It seems that it's the part that it gets dangerous is that the sociopathic part where these behaviors in and of themselves, they're not wonderful, but taken together on a repeat basis where there's no care for the other person, that's where the harm is, where it's so inward focused that the person drains all the energy out of the other one and there's nothing left of them, and they just get worn out by that. And it's just, it's a one-way relationship.
Yeah, I think in the movie you referenced the vampire, right? So that's exactly what Raif was just saying here. So
one thing that's interesting too is Judy's character in the beginning. I mean, Judy, the character played by Marisa Tomei in the film, there's a certain part of her that's not likable because she's sort of a hammer that sees everybody as a nail in the beginning. And I'm not going to spoil the rest of the movie, but in the movie, she's built her career around identifying narcissists and that kind of thing. And even her daughter is like put off by it, without spoiling the plot. And her friend, played beautifully by Sherry Cola, who is hilarious, by the way. I thought she was great. A real concern too is sort of this overdiagnosis or labeling concern, which we'll talk about in a little bit later. But Rahul, you were going to ask you had another question here too.
I think it might have been partly answered already, but you sort of have Judy here describes the 3 phases in the movie, right? Which is you have, and like we were talking about pre-show, you have the honeymoon phase, then you devalue someone, and then you discard them. And then I know Raif was talking about how sometimes, as we see in cases oftentimes, and when as lawyers, people, instead of discarding, they oftentimes hold on super tight because you can only let someone go on your own terms. They don't get to leave.
Like nobody gets to leave me. I decide when they leave,
So how frequent do you notice, from your background, that these are usually the phases and this is the pattern that these relationships sort of go through?
I would say almost 100%. 100%. That pattern is a great red flag to narcissistic personality traits in your intimate relationship, the idealize, devalue, discard. And what's interesting though is it can happen like in this cycle where you're still with the person. Like they can idealize you and then they start to devalue you. Then you might push back and they do a discard in a way that's like, well, I'm not coming to the wedding then. I'm not going to be your +1, or I'm going to move out now, or I'm going to cheat on you and say it's your fault. And then you go to them and you say, what the heck's going on? And this doesn't feel good, or I caught you doing this. And then they start the cycle again. They start to idealize you. They'll hoover you in. They'll suck you back in by saying, I didn't cheat. You read that wrong. That was someone else. Or I only cheated because you don't love me anymore. And I'm so insecure and you're my favorite person. And please don't leave me. If you leave me, I'm nothing. And they do the manipulation that way. And so then they pull you back in with the idealization, and then the devaluation starts again. And it just gets faster and faster and faster. And several psychologists I've listened to, talk about like this initial idealization phase being somewhere anywhere between like 4 months and 2 years, where you really might not see any of the devaluation but typically it's like within like 3 to 4 months, you could probably start seeing that, or you'll start seeing other things where they like talk about other people. They say that person's crazy, or my boss is, it's not my fault I got fired again. It's my boss. He's awful. That
is true. The othering, the blaming everyone else. Yeah, it's not me. Everybody else is stupid. My boss is a jerk. Yeah, that is definitely something we've seen, and it's definitely a pattern you'll see with those kind of folks, is that they're perfect. Everybody else is crazy or no good, and that's true. One thing I think is interesting, that we've done some homework on this, both for our own work and also for this show, was looking at, what's the diagnosed percentage in the population of, I guess, true narcissists, BPD diagnosed. It seems like that is somewhere between 1% to 16%. It sort of depends on what study you look at and what setting. It also seems like, from what I'm seeing, that it doesn't appear that the level of narcissism is going up, but it seems like awareness is going up quite a bit. Is there more narcissism than ever, or are we just able to recognize it now when we never recognized it before?
I haven't done like clinical studies myself.
Oh yeah, I'm not trying to put you on the hot seat or anything.
But I would say, like, from what I have encountered over the years, and granted, I started at a place where I was like in a vacuum. Everybody didn't understand what I was talking about. And that's almost why the character of Di exists, where she's like, what are you talking about? Now people have moved on and they've gotten more information, especially through social media.
Oh, now it just hit me that Di is there to be the audience. Okay, thank you. That's actually a clever device I didn't realize. So for those of you who haven't seen the movie, I'm not going to spoil this, but Di is Judy's friend, and she asks questions that would come to your mind as somebody watching the movie, and it helps you understand what's going on, but it's so smooth, it's utterly natural. It educates you without being an educational movie. It's entertaining and fun to watch, and that's probably where the comedy is a better teacher than making it a horror film, because you're going to get a lot more people watching it because it's funny. It comes in an unexpected package rather than just a bum out movie where the guy's just nasty through the whole thing and that's it. Okay, there we go. Who's going to watch it?
The narcissist puts on the scream mask and like chases people with knives, right? So,
and I will say this: people watch the movie because I can say this: it's not a predictable ending. And that makes it also interesting. You think in a lot of these movies we watch these days, you kind of know the ending when you read the title of the movie. So you said this, and you're right. I think there is some degree of concern about over labeling, and people should probably, and you've been careful to say, I'm not diagnosing anybody. Do your own homework, folks out there. And there is probably a reality. And the word narc has become kind of an insult, which Judy Di says that to Judy in the movie, kind of like, would you stop calling everybody a narc? Now you're talking about the guy that busts people for drugs. It's clever because that label's getting thrown around a lot on social media. And of course, when people tap on a video, they even call it narc talk, because on TikTok you scroll a video and then the algorithm starts pumping all these videos to you where you think, everybody's a narcissist. Like, what? I'm surrounded. You do a good job in the film portraying things with a fairness, because it's not all some negativity. And I thought that was a healthy approach, because you watch some of this narc talk stuff and I think the world's coming to an end. Everybody's a narcissist and all boys are bad. That's not the message. So I was going to mention Dr. Ramani because the book, It's Not You, is a huge New York Times bestseller, and you're on Doctor's show recently. I wasn't aware of that. That's really cool. The Narcissism Epidemic's been out. That came out, was a big book on that. Rethinking Narcissism. A couple of folks I know personally, Lisa Johnson and Chris Berry, have a book called Been There, Got Out. I don't know if you're aware of. They have a show and a couple books about narcissism that are excellent. And then, of course, Bill Eddy's book, Splitting, I recommend to the audience. It's an excellent guide to divorcing a narcissist and understanding what you're going to go through. What's the one thing you hope somebody takes away from the film, Ann Marie, that if nothing else, what would be the one takeaway you would want people to have in this?
I would say that I would want people to take away the feeling that it's actually wonderful to take a chance on love and to try and to connect with someone. That's why we're all here as humans, is to connect with one another. If it doesn't work out, that doesn't mean you're stupid or dumb. It just means you took a risk. There's nothing wrong with that. You're just being human, And then, particularly us narc bait, which is what we call the over empathetic helpers in the world, our compassion. That compassion is your superhero strength, And if you can live a life of empathy for others and for yourself, you'll be happier in the long run.
It's great. I love it. So one more thing, after almost 10 years fighting to make this, what does it feel like to have this baby out in the world?
It feels surreal sometimes. And other times I feel like, wow, that was a lot of work, and I just kind of want to go to a beach somewhere and lay down for a while. But no, it feels really good. And it's like, as a director of an indie film, we still were a small budget, small film. And either I know where the bodies are, as I'm watching it. And I was like, man, if I had, this amount of money or these amount of days or whatever. So those are some of the things that I think about. But overall, I'm really, really proud of how the film turned out. And it's been very, very touching. It really has been. Hear from the audience if they write me or, comment on DMs or things like that on Instagram, that they enjoyed the film, that it made them laugh, that they felt seen. I had one woman at a screening come up and hug me. She was crying. She's like, I'm going into mediation on Wednesday with my narcissistic husband. And this was just a welcome. I have so much tension and so much stress. And I just felt I could laugh, I could cry, I could be myself, for an hour and a half kind of
Sure.
thing.
So when does this movie come out?
Well, the movie's been out. It was released in theaters. And can you tell us, Ann Marie, where people can find it on streaming platforms?
Absolutely. So we are in what's called the video on demand window. So we were in theaters March 27th. That was a total, whirlwind and so much fun to have the movie in theaters. And people went out to see it. And then we just started video on demand, which is basically it's available for purchase or rent on any platform where you can buy or rent movies. So Amazon, Apple, everything. And then we're currently in discussions with various streamers. So the streamers are like your Paramount Plus, your Netflix, where you just already own a subscription to that streaming service. So hopefully you'll see us. I don't know if I can make any announcements yet, but on streaming by the end of the summer.
Good for you. Okay.
Yeah, but I would love, if anybody finds the time to, rent the film. I think it's $5.99 right now. It's not crazy expensive. So, to support us indie filmmakers.
Yeah, you spend that on a coffee every day, so you might as well get the film.
One thing we said before the show that I don't know if we said during the show, but we need to support films like this because we talked to Ann Marie about these days, it's rare to see a film that's charming, that's got a unique story. This isn't some cast of folks from the community theater. These are pro actors, Oscar winners. Yeah, a great cast, a touching story, and not just a superhero film. That there's so much derivative stuff coming out of Hollywood now that to see an interesting study in human life.
And made in the United States, because a lot of production is going overseas because of the tax credit issue. And we made our film in Los Angeles. The studio that made it, is my own production company that I partnered with a couple other production companies, but a lot of our investors in the production company divorced Narcissist. We talked about that and wanted to see this story on screen, in a way that made people feel a little bit better about themselves and not worse,
Well, we want to congratulate you, and we really enjoyed it. Thank you for being on the show. It's been great, and we wish you all the best. Ann Marie Allison, the movie is You're Dating a Narcissist. The book, please show us the book. It's on Amazon, right?
It is on Amazon. It's also on yourdatinganarcissist.com if you want to learn anything more about the movie or the book.
Yeah, check it out. Get the book, and please see the movie. Thanks, Ann Marie. We really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So nice to meet you guys.
Pleasure to meet you, too. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.